So, our next speaker has been a friend of the symposium for a few years now, and her time has come. She's a very experienced presenter and journalist, working for the BBC for 25 years, and then on to working for alternative David Icke platform, wasn't it, really? And so this afternoon, she's going to reveal all. A big welcome for Jemma Cooper.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen, for that introduction. And thank you, Andy, so very much for the opportunity to be able to speak here today. It's a massive honour. So before we do anything, the clarion call of the middle age. Where's my glasses? So here we go. Before I start this talk today, though, I am going to need some help. And that is help thanking another very special person without whom I absolutely would not be standing on this stage today. 10 years ago, I started doing a series of workshops here in Glastonbury, where I met a very, very interesting woman. And I was talking to her about my life and how it had unfolded to that point and what had brought me to Glastonbury at that point and this burgeoning spiritual journey that I appeared to be on. And she said, well, I'm one of the organisers of an event I think you'd really like. And I was like, what is it? And she said, it's the Glastonbury Symposium. And I was like, what is it? And so she told me about all the speakers that have stood up on this stage and the kind of things that are talked about and how the same people come back year after year and it's been going for decades and how everybody knows each other and it's like one big family, and she called it like the gathering of the clan and all this stuff. And I was like, nah, that sounds a bit weird. That sounds like a cult. And she was like, no, it's not like that, it's not like that, it's not like that. Come along. So I did, and 2014 was my first ever symposium, and to say it changed my life, oh my God, that is such an understatement. I have made some of the best friends of my life through this event. I've had some of the best weekends of my life through this event, and I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to be standing on the stage at this event where so many brilliant speakers have gone before me, you know, not just in the decades gone by, but this weekend, you know, we're only halfway through and we've heard some amazing people. And on that note, I don't know just quickly how many of you were here in 2014 or even remember it, but it's where Mark Devlin did his first ever presentation right up here on this stage. Oh my God, I remember it well because I was sat on that side, about 3 rows from the front, when Mark was doing his talk about the sinister side of the music industry. And I watched, like wide-eyed, as he systematically destroyed my entire young adult life and all my hopes and illusions of showbiz. And it was a brilliant talk, don't get me wrong, it was a brilliant talk, but I mean, I never forgot it. And over the last couple of years, Mark and I have become very good friends. And today he sat over there watching me do my first ever presentation here at the symposium. And so the parallels for me are quite surreal and quite nerve-wracking, but I am very glad to be here. And of course, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been meeting this amazing woman, getting to know her, and the amazing team of people that she works with. So before this talk gets underway, I'd like you to help me show my appreciation to her, not least because meeting her changed my life, but on a more personal note, she's getting married in a few weeks' time, and I've never seen her happier, and she absolutely deserves all the happiness in the world. So ladies and gentlemen, symposium delegates, the clan, please help me show my appreciation for her. And most of you here will know her. Most of you here are probably terrified of her. I know I am sometimes. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, Di Brown. And her amazing fiancé, Chris, as well. Congratulations, guys. Sorry, Di, it had to be done. I love you, man. I love you. I love you. So thank you very much. Thank you for helping me thank Di, and thank you for creating some lovely energy here this afternoon for this talk to get underway. The thing I'm actually here to do, you know, the thing Andy wants me to do. I'm on it, Andy, I'm on it. So some of you may know that I was supposed to give this talk last year, but for a variety of reasons I didn't, and the main one is that I bottled it, and it is as simple as that. I chickened out. And I'd had a very dramatic and public departure from the BBC. I'd been all over the newspapers, and I really did not want to dredge up what had been probably the most unpleasant 2 years of my life. I just didn't feel ready. I was still quite shell-shocked by the whole experience. I was worried if I got up on stage, it would be nothing more than some kind of stream of consciousness confessional, free therapy for me, but nothing for you guys, you know. So I bottled it. Yeah, I chickened out. This year, however, it's different, and that's for a variety of reasons. The first one is that so much, and I mean so much, has come out about the role of the mainstream media in the last 3 years, about what went on. And so much has come out in the last 6 to 12 months, really. I mean, here in the UK, we've had things like the lockdown files in the Daily Telegraph, which clearly show how the media was used by this government and governments worldwide to terrify the public into conforming, and how the media used behavioural insight teams, psychology, how Ofcom in this country was very clearly telling the broadcasters stick to the official message and nothing else. You know, it was a very controlled narrative, but it's all beginning to come out. So people are much more sceptical now about the mainstream media than they were 2-3 years ago. And people are also seeing how the mainstream media is now applying those same techniques and fear-mongering and scaremongering to other stories. Now, I don't engage with the mainstream media at all anymore. The television is never on in my house, the radio is never on, I don't read the newspapers. But I am on a couple of private Telegram channels, and on there I see things doing the rounds about, you know, how the mainstream is like trying to put the fear of God into everyone about the weather, you know, things like that hot weather in the summer. You know, things that didn't used to happen like that. It didn't used to be reported like that. But people are seeing through it. People are seeing the scaremongering and they're seeing through it, which is great. You know, so that's one of the reasons I'm here. The other reason I'm here is a little bit more esoteric, and that's because my psychic, because everyone has a psychic, right? Everyone has their own personal psychic. Well, I do. And he's great, and he said to me, yeah, you should do that talk this year. It'll go down well, and people will get something out of it. And I thought, well, let's put that prediction to the test. You'll be the judge of whether my psychic is worth the money, and we'll get to it. So I did feel the time was right for me to tell my story. And it is a story, you know, it's nothing more. And stories are what I've dealt in my entire career. They were my stock in trade. I've worked in the mainstream media, in news, all my working life, and all we did was tell stories, you know, global stories, political stories, organizational stories, individual stories. That's what we did. And this story is mine. And it is definitely not, absolutely not, a one-size-fits-all. Absolutely not. This is not an official narrative, what I'm about to say up here. And God forbid, you know, far from it. I don't have the definitive take on the mainstream media, and I don't have the definitive take on the alternative media, even though I've got experience in both. I just have my take on it. So before we get underway, I would just say, take what resonates with you from what I'm about to say this afternoon, and just discard the rest. And nothing might resonate with you. I mean, I might get to the end of this, and you'll think, what the hell was that? What the hell was she going on about? And if you do, that is fine, because it is just a story. But it's my story, and I am sticking with it. So here we are. My name is Jemma Cooper, and I used to work for the BBC. There we go. Said it. It's out. It's out there. I've done it. And it does rather sound like I'm in kind of personal recovery with this. You know, my name is Jemma Cooper, and I used to be a BBC journalist. Please help me. I've done some bad things, you know. Oh, I need help. You know, I was a BBC journalist and BBC producer and BBC presenter right here in the West Country, in fact. And my office was at BBC Bristol, which is not far from here. And that's a big department of the BBC. You know, it's home to the world-famous Natural History Unit. Lots of Radio 4 programmes are made there. Some big BBC One shows like Countryfile, Antiques Roadshow. So being there it was kind of a big deal, you know. And I joined the BBC in 1999. And before that, I'd done 4 years on a big regional daily newspaper in the north of England. And I was taken on as a paid postgraduate trainee, and I was trained in my craft. And journalism is a craft if you do it properly. I was trained in that craft, though, by a load of tough, grizzled, middle-aged, hard-bitten, hard-drinking newspaper hacks who knew their trade inside out. They were absolutely terrifying. I still have nightmares about my first ever news editor. They were terrifying. They cut you no slack at all, but they did make me a good journalist. They made me a good reporter. They taught me how to get an original story, how to dig for stories, unearth stories, how to challenge my sources rigorously, and how never ever to give up. But more importantly, they told me and taught me and everyone who worked for that paper to hold authority to account and not repeat parrot fashion what they happened to be saying as truth just because they were authority bodies, like the police or the local council, No, we were told in no uncertain terms that the people we represented were our readers, the people that bought the paper, the people that paid our wages, not corporations, not authorities. Times have changed, eh? Times have changed. So I worked there for 4 years, and I rose from a trainee to a junior to a senior reporter to a special correspondent. And in 1999, I was taken on by the BBC. And my career at the corporation, it went well, it went well for a long time. And it almost went kind of spookily well for a young working-class woman with no connections in the industry, no public or private school education, no daddy to get me work experience, none of that. But despite all that, my trajectory at the BBC, it went quite quick. And this is where the talk kind of verges into, I don't think what anyone here would think was strange territory, but if you were telling it to somebody on the outside, they might think, does sound quite odd, yeah. Now, I firmly believe, knowing what I know now, that there was a hidden force at work when it came to my career. You can call it source, the universe, you can call it God, call it what you want, but there were some very clear synchronicities, which were talked about this morning, synchronicities, coincidences, and so-called chance events that were anything but, really. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I don't know how many of you here really believe in the philosophy that we have life paths and we're all guided and we're all where we need to be and we all sign up for this before we come here. I think probably many people would subscribe to that. I didn't used to, but I absolutely do now. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of how my life went. Incidents at the time I thought were a bit odd. Looking back, no, anything but. So in 1999, I joined the BBC. And all my friends and family were like, oh my God, how did you get that job? How did you get that job? How did you get into the BBC? And I was like, I don't know, it just kind of happened. It just kind of sort of happened. And I'd actually quit my job at the paper at this point in my career, and I was getting ready to go travelling. I'd never had a gap year. I was 28 years old. I'd been working flat out for 4 years, sort of establishing my career. And I thought, well, I'm going to have a break now while I'm still young. So I was working my notice. I was packing up my flat. When out of the blue, the BBC in the North, they phoned me up and they said, we want you to come in for an interview. And I was like, what? They said, yeah, we like you. We've been following your work. And we actually wrote to you a couple of weeks ago asking you to come in. And we were wondering why you haven't replied. And I was like, well, one, I didn't get the letter. And two, I've quit my job and I'm actually packing up my flat. I was literally packing boxes in my flat when the phone went. And they were like, well, why don't you come in anyway for a chat? I was like, well, okay. So a couple of days later, I was in there for an informal chat and I got given the job. Pretty much like out of the blue, on the spot, I got given the job. And I thought that was strange, but of course I didn't turn it down because I phoned my mum and I told my mum and she was like, Jemsy, you must take the job. Forget about this little holiday you want to go on. There's the BBC, take the job. So I took the job and then a week later, this letter that they'd written to me 2 weeks previous turned up on the mat, dated 2 weeks previous, inviting me for the job, which I already had. I was like, odd, just. So I took the job, and then in 2007, I was at BBC Bristol, where I'd been for about 6-7 years at that point. And I was getting ready to quit and go travelling. I'd just broken up with a long-term boyfriend. It was all very amicable, but breakups, they make you question your life and everything. And I thought, right, this is it. I'm going to quit. I'm going to have the gap year I never had. I'm going to go travelling. I had it all planned. Me and my friends were going to India at Christmas anyway for 3 weeks. They were going to come back. I was like, no, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to have some cocktails on the beach and all that stuff. So I had it all planned. So that was it. I was going to quit. So I was writing my resignation letter in November 2007 when, once again, something weird happened. I was literally sat in the canteen in my lunch break writing my resignation letter when my friend said to me, hey, have you seen these ads in the BBC magazine, regional weather presenters? I reckon you'd be really good at that. And I looked at this ad, and bearing in mind at this time I had no experience of weather or presenting whatsoever. I was a journalist and producer. I was behind the scenes. But I looked at this ad, and out of nowhere, probably not for the first time, definitely not for the last time, I heard a voice right here to the side of me, a voice. Really clear, really calm, really certain, really knowing. Like my voice, but not my voice. And it said, you're going to get that. And then my ego kicked back in. I was like, nah, I'm going traveling. And I carried on writing my resignation letter. My friend was like, no, you should go for it. What harm can it do? You get it. You don't. Go traveling. So I was like, oh, all right, when's the closing date? And he was like, oh, today. I was like, oh, God. So I bashed out this application, emailed it off, and carried on writing my resignation letter, which I fully intended on handing in the following week. The following week, I was in the BBC Weather Centre in London having an audition, an interview, and I got the job. Out the blue. Wasn't looking for it, didn't want it, got it out the blue. And everyone was again, oh my God, how'd you get that job? How'd you get a job at the BBC? And I was like, I don't know, it just sort of kind of happened. And then that made me think about how I got my role on the big daily paper as a postgraduate trainee. Because those jobs were rare as hen's teeth, because it was a paid postgrad. You got paid on the job and you had a job. And if you didn't get on one, you had to go back to uni, pay for your own postgrad. So everybody wanted them. And I remember walking in, I was 23, completely wet behind the ears, walked into my interview for this paid postgrad, and this big, burly northern guy, he's behind the desk, and he looked me up and down, and he went, well, you better get ready to be disappointed, because we've had more than 1,000 applicants for this. And again, this voice came through me, and I don't know what happened, but this kind of voice, and it came through me, because I don't know what possessed me to speak to him like this, and I looked at him and I went, yeah, someone's got to get it, mate, might as well be me. And I got it. I got it that day. And yes, yo. And not only did I get it, they did something they've never done before, and I don't think they did it after. They deferred it for a year because I couldn't move back up north in time. Now, back then, I had absolutely no knowledge, of the hidden dimensions of life, soul contracts, the thing you've agreed to do before you come here, none of it. And if you tried to talk to me about any of it then, I would have been like, no way, you're crazy. I thought, or my ego wanted to believe, that I'd landed these jobs, these plum jobs, due to a devastating combination of my good looks, charm, and talent. That's how I got those jobs. But even then, there was a little inkling in me that, something going on here, that might not have been the case. So I got into the media really, given how competitive it was and still is, very easily. And I landed some good jobs, real good jobs, very easily. And every time I tried to leave, every time I was so certain I'm leaving, no, it kept me back in. A few years later, it went the other way. Because when it was time for me to get out, 2020, 2021, the universe, creation, God, whatever you want to call it, it wasted absolutely no time whatsoever, giving me some very clear signs that you're out, you're really out, and that door is firmly shut, you're never going back. And we will get to that later. So back to 2007, I took the weather presenting job, and everything was going great because I was a good little corporate employee, did what I was told, I was a BBC presenter, I had my hair cut in a blonde bod, my little outfits, and I drove my sports car around town and did loads of work for charity. I was fully in the role, and I loved it because, of course, it was all about me. Me. Totally in my ego, absolute knob. But then, in 2010, 2011, it all changed because basically, I think like a lot of people in here, I don't know when it happened to you or how it happened to you, but I had my head blown off. Now, when I was preparing this talk, I asked a few people, what I shouldn't put in it. And one of them is here today. And he's my good friend Tony, if I'm not mistaken, he's sat over there. Tony, put your hand up. That's him. Gone back to the tent to finish his kebab. That's Tony. My really good friend Tony, Uncle Tone, I call him. And we met through this event in 2014. And over that time, me and Tony have been to so many alternative conferences together, and we have seen so many speakers, some good and some not so good. So I asked Tony what he thought I should put in this talk, and he went, well, for God's sake, Jem, don't put all that woo-woo stuff in. Don't put all that woo-woo stuff in. Just talk about the BBC. Don't put all the woo-woo stuff in. Nobody wants to hear the woo-woo stuff. And I was like, But the woo-woo stuff happened, and it's kind of the reason my life went the way it did. And I was like, I don't know. So then I asked another good friend of mine what I should put in. I think many of you here might know her. She lives here in Glastonbury. And that's Sandy Adams. And Sandy has done some amazing research on Agenda 21 and Agenda 30. I mean, she is the go-to expert on all of that. And she's done hundreds, if not thousands, of presentations over the years. So I asked her what she thought I should put in, and I told her what Tony had said. And she said, no, darling, you must keep the woo-woo stuff in. You absolutely must keep the woo-woo stuff in. It's the reason why we're all doing what we're doing. It's the reason our lives have changed. You must keep it in. And I weighed it up, because I respect and love them both. And I thought, Tony, Sandy, and I have to say, Tony, the woo-woo stuff is staying in. It's staying in. Yeah, it's staying in. It's staying in. Oh, look, my script's on the floor. Never mind. Now, I'm going to stop calling it the woo-woo stuff, because that's disrespectful. I'm going to give it its proper name, which is, of course, a spiritual awakening. 2010, 2011, I just had this massive, massive spiritual awakening. And, of course, this awakening didn't just happen to me. It's happened, and it's happening at a huge rate to millions of other people around the planet as we speak. And I don't like the term, which has been bandied about these last few years, the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening, because it implies some kind of one amorphous, massive, simultaneous event. Like, tomorrow afternoon, after we've all had a roast dinner at 3:30, we're all just going to wake up and human consciousness will evolve and go on to the next level of its development, and everything's going to be great and it's fine, this big awakening. And of course, it's not like that at all, because everyone's awakenings are very personal, very private, and very unique to them. The signs and symbols on your journey are different to anyone else's. So I don't believe at all there's one massive awakening, but there are these individual awakenings happening at a rapid pace. Some are having it now through politics, some are having it through economics, some are having it through health, some are having it through the alternative media. That's helping a lot of people have their awakenings. It's not waking people up, it's facilitating your own awakening. And some are having it due to trauma, and that was certainly my path. I'd had a very traumatic experience in 2009, and I started doing a lot of yoga and meditation to cope with that trauma, and that yoga and meditation led to my awakening. But it doesn't really matter however it's happening to people, it is happening. And once you've had it happen to you, as I'm sure many of you know in here, if not all of you, once you've had that perception shift where your heart and your soul managed to override the ego and all the programming we've been subjected to our entire lives that the ego believes, once you have that shift, for however long, 30 seconds, 30 minutes, 30 days, but once you've had that shift where you look around and you go, hang on a minute, life's not what I thought it was. Hang on a minute, I'm not what I thought I was. And hang on, the way we're taught to live our lives is completely wrong. Once you've had that shift, and you shift internally, then of course the external shifts with you and your life begins to change. And the reason I'm talking about this, of course, is that perception shift in me, although it happened over 10 years ago now, it played a huge part in why I ended up walking away from the BBC. And it's the same for loads of people. I'm sure everyone in here has got their own stories about, as they change, they walk away, and people around the world now are walking away, as we're seeing, from systems and situations and circumstances and people that are no longer serving them. And the last 3 years has massively, massively speeded this up. So I just mentioned the BBC there and leaving, and so I think this is a good time to talk about the BBC and news in general and television news, because that's what I'm here for. So what is television? And more specifically, what's television news? So as I mentioned earlier, this is my story, this is my take on things, but I would argue that with my decades of experience in the industry, seeing firsthand the way news is made, how I was taught to make it, that the first thing news is, whether we like it or not, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not, and we'll talk about this in a minute a bit more, but news is entertainment. It's entertainment. It's titillation. Whether you turn on the TV, turn on the radio, pick up a newspaper, go online, pick up your phone, whatever you do, social media as well, when you turn on the news, you're looking for something to give you a hit, a reaction, this dopamine hit in the brain. You expect it, actually. You expect it. You may not want to admit it to yourself. I don't want to admit it to myself, but that's what it is. You're looking for entertainment. And you might think, oh, no, I don't watch TV for that. I'm serious. I watch it for the facts and the information. You might think that, but when you think about how it's presented, very dramatic title sequence, and the music, and the images flashing at you, and the headlines and all that, you're being seduced. You're being seduced, you're thinking your ego likes it. You're like, oh, there's something there for me, something there, ooh, and you're getting very stimulated. And if you think about what you do when you're watching something and it's not stimulating you enough, and you're not excited enough, and you're not getting that reaction, you're not getting that hit, you get bored, you feel a bit cheated. You want something else, you switch channels, or you switch over the radio station, or you put the paper down, you pick something else up, because you are looking for something to make you go, ooh, that entertainment, that hit to the brain. We're all a little bit addicted to it. And I think that this point about how news is actually really primarily, first and foremost, entertainment, in my opinion, is quite nicely illustrated by the fact that in the television industry, all the news editors and heads of station, they refer to people who watch or listen to the news as the audience. You know, news departments carry out audience research. It's audience figures. It's not viewer research, it's not viewer figures, it's audience. And if you think about it, if you really think about that, where do you normally find an audience? Well, you find an audience in a theatre, you find audience in a cinema, you find audiences at festivals, you find audiences at gigs and concerts, you find audiences at a show, a show. And what are TV programs called? They're called shows, TV shows, with audiences. And the one thing all audiences have in common, including you today, really is you want to be entertained. You do, you want to be entertained. I want to be entertained when I'm in an audience. Otherwise, what am I paying for? So entertain me, take me out of myself, make me think of something different. So in my opinion, TV news is primarily entertainment. You switch on the black box in the corner of the room, or you pick up a screen when you feel a little bit crap, you feel a little bit bored, you want to forget about your day, you want to think about something else other than your life and everything that's going on in it. You want a bit of company, you want to laugh, possibly, but you want to be entertained, you want to be distracted. And it doesn't matter at all, it doesn't matter one iota, one jot, what the subject matter is. War, famine, drought, or Love Island. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. There's no difference, in my eyes, between watching the 6 o'clock news and watching Strictly Come Dancing. There really isn't. Because if you think about it, right, Strictly Come Dancing, you've got oh, I like that contestant. Oh, I don't like that contestant. Oh, I can't believe what that judge just said, And if you watch the 6 o'clock news, it's oh, I like that politician. Or I don't like that politician. Oh, I can't believe what that commentator just said. It's exactly the same, The reaction you're having physiologically and emotionally to those two things is the same. It doesn't matter at all about the content. And that physical reaction you're having is actually bad for you. There's a lot of cortisol, there's a lot of adrenaline going around because you're getting yourself all worked up thinking about what you're watching. But the physical reaction on both is the same. So in my opinion, TV news in general, is primarily entertainment, and it is designed to appeal to the human ego, which most of us live in most of the time. I think a lot of people in this room probably try not to do that, but it's very difficult. It's how we're programmed. And the ego really wants to be entertained. It really does. It loves it. It wants to be distracted constantly. Oh yeah, look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. It wants gratification and reward. It wants stimulus, gratification, and reward all the time. That's how the ego works. It's never happy. It's always going after something. And so it's great, gratification and reward. Ego loves it. Your soul hates it. Your soul hates it. And we kind of know that as well, because if you watch TV for too long, you stare at a screen for too long, you don't feel good. Not really. Not really. So that's the first thing I think news is, entertainment. Entertain me, But there's another side to TV and news, and it is more sinister, in my opinion. And I think that can be summed up in one word: program. Now, in my career at the BBC, I often used to go out with cameramen, and we used to film in offices, because offices were easy to film, and we did a lot of interviews in offices, and we were in offices quite a lot. And in offices, you get computer screens. And quite often when we were filming in offices, I would notice that the camera crew would spend a lot more time than usual kind of adjusting their lenses before filming. Now, I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice today that I'm not using PowerPoint. I'm not. And I've also got pen and paper here, And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that I've never used PowerPoint. I have no plans to start. And two is that I didn't want you guys staring up there at a screen coming from my laptop here. I really, really didn't want that. And the reason is this. One day after we'd done an interview in an office, I was back in my office, and I was inputting the rushes, the unedited material, into the system, ready to cut a piece. And as I was looking at the footage that we just filmed in the office, I noticed that all the computer screens in this office, they looked kind of broken. They were all moving and flickering, and I was like, blimey. And I said to the cameraman who I'd just been with, I said, look at this, look at this, look at all these, the computers are broken. And he looked and he went, oh, I'm really sorry, Jem. I forgot to adjust the aperture on the camera. Sorry, mate, schoolboy error, schoolboy error. And I said, well, what do you mean? So this cameraman, he then explained to me how screens, digital screens, really work. And they flicker constantly. They've got this flicker and cycle and revolve, and this flicker and cycle and revolve. And the human eye is so sophisticated, you can't actually see it. It doesn't mean it's not happening, but your eye is processing it so brilliantly that you can't see this flicker. But this cameraman's 35-grand camera, nowhere near as sophisticated as a human eye, so it's picking up this flicker and this cycle. So I was like, well, that's how screens work then. He said, yeah, that's how screens work. They constantly flicker, 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 and cycle and revolve. And so it's not just computer screens, it's the same with a TV screen, digital TV screen, our phones, our tablets, our devices, our laptops, all of it. There's a flicker and revolve. Your eye can't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And it doesn't mean it's not dangerous, because it is. It is. That flicker has an effect on us, which is very real, and it's very proven. It's called the flicker-induced hypnotic state. Now, lots of articles have been written about this, but there's a really good one that I read by a guy called Hanan Parvez on the website Psych Mechanics, and his analysis is good, it's very comprehensive. He's not saying anything new, but it's simply written. But basically, within seconds of watching TV, and certainly minutes, this flicker effect takes your brain, our brains, from a beta state, which is what we operate in, all the time in our daily life, like, I've got to take the kids to school, got to pick up the dry cleaning, got to mow the lawn, what are we having for tea, very chatter, 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 very 3D. And it takes your brain away from that, this flicker effect, into an alpha state. And that's associated with meditation, deep relaxation, and sleep, and that's why you often feel sleepy when you're watching TV. Now, this alpha state is also the state that hypnotists use on you when they're trying to help you give up smoking, or they're on stage trying to make you think you're a 6-foot chicken, all that stuff. It's the alpha state, because in this state, our brains are highly programmable. When we're in this alpha state, our subconscious minds become highly suggestible. So whatever information is coming out of the television while you're in this alpha state goes straight into your subconscious and can form your core beliefs. Now, I'm sure most people are familiar with core beliefs, but their core beliefs are based on experiences that we mainly had when we were young, and our memories of those experiences go into our subconscious and become our core beliefs, deep in our subconscious. And then those core beliefs underpin how we behave in the world, how we act in the world, how we relate to people. But core beliefs, they can be changed, and hypnosis is a really good way of doing that. That's why hypnosis works so well for things like weight loss and smoking and those bad habits. The hypnotist puts you into an alpha state, rewires your core belief system around those issues, and then your behavior changes accordingly. So when you're watching TV in this alpha state, this mildly hypnotized state, the information bypasses the conscious straight into the subconscious and can alter your core beliefs. Because your conscious mind is kind of like your security guard, but it's taking a back seat at that point. Normally, the conscious mind can be the bit of us that goes, no, that don't feel right. There's something a bit off here. Or I don't actually think I am a 6-foot chicken. I don't think I want to be a 6-foot chicken. No, thank you. But of course, in this state, we don't have that. So information can go straight into your subconscious and can become a big part of your belief system, especially if it's repeated enough. Something like this. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. Ooh, Sound familiar? Now, just in case you're not convinced about this, and you think, I'm in control of my life. No one can program me. I'll just use an example here of how powerful your subconscious is. Think about when you're a kid and you watch TV. Now, childhood is a period of huge hypnosis, because up until about the age of 7, your brain is pretty much on alpha all the time. It's how you learn to survive in the world. We haven't got time to analyze and see what's going on around us, because you just wouldn't survive. So when you're a kid, your brain is absorbing what it's seeing very, very quickly. It's how you learn to eat, how you learn to relate to people, how you learn to talk. You're hypnotized into it till about the age of 8, and then your brain changes very slightly. So when you're young, you're picking up core beliefs from all over the place because you're mildly hypnotized and you haven't got a fully developed conscious mind, because it would just take too long to learn stuff. So if you think about it, when you're a kid, you're watching Superman on TV, right? And he's flying through the air and his cape's billowing out behind him and he's watching him fly, and you're getting all excited watching Superman fly. Next thing you know, you've got an old sheet out of the airing cupboard, you've tied it around your neck, and you're trying to fling yourself off the garage roof because you truly believe, you've just seen it on telly, in an alpha state, you actually truly believe you can fly. You do, and I've got a personal example of this. Does anyone remember in here that TV show from the 60s and 70s called White Horses? Yeah. Oh my God, I was obsessed with that show, right? And I was a little kid, and I used to sit on the arm of the sofa That was my horse, and my skipping rope for reins, and I loved that horse, and I would groom it, and I would get it carrots from the kitchen. It was the arm of the sofa, but I was so obsessed with this show, and I used to ride the arm of the sofa and sing the theme tune, and I truly believed that if I did that enough, it would turn into a horse, and I'd be on my way to Yugoslavia to meet Julie to work with the Lipizzaner stallions. I was still a bit annoyed it didn't work out like that, but that I was so convinced. You know. So that's just an illustration of how, when we're in that alpha state, we really can't differentiate between things we're seeing on the screen and our reality. It goes straight into our subconscious, especially when we're young, and it affects our behavior. But I don't think we really grow out of it. So, you know, you might think again, no, I'm in control, I've got the remote control, I'm in control. But I really think that when we're watching TV, you know, we're mildly hypnotized and we're the ones getting programmed, unfortunately. And of course, this programming, it doesn't start with the telly. The TV just simply reinforces the programming. It goes way, way back. And the programming, of course, starts in school. And David Edelman, who was here in 2019, has done so much amazing work on this in his book, School, No Place for Children. Damned straight, no place for children. You know, school is this wonderful place. We're told to sit down, shut up, don't have any fun, don't be the joyful, creative, amazing, energetic being you came here to be. God forbid, don't do that. No. Do what you're told, don't answer back, and do not think for yourself. And in my opinion, you know, the news is a huge reinforcement of this programming that begins in the classroom. Because if you think about it again, how does the news actually look when you're watching it? You've got the newsreader, the teacher, sat behind his desk, her desk, or stood in front of the blackboard, which is now a digital screen, with the papers in their hand, just like the teacher, telling you what to think, how to behave, what's true, what's not. And if you go against that authority figure, that teacher, that newsreader, you're wrong, and you will get punished. So if you remember core beliefs, talked about them just a second ago, the core beliefs that formed when we were young, and I think one of the main core beliefs we form when we are young, probably the main one actually, is the teacher knows best. They tell you what to think, they tell you what to do, and you don't answer back ever. Authority knows best. It's such a core belief. It goes into us at such a young age that we don't know we've got it. We think that's completely normal. Do what you're told, do what you're told. And that's what the news does every night, reinforcing that core belief that formed when we were kids. Teacher knows best, newsreader knows best. So I think that combination of those wonderful factors has come together so that the TV is programming us. And so the obvious question, of course, is, well, what is it programming us with? And of course, it's a manufactured reality. The TV is hypnotizing you into believing its version of reality. And of course, that version of reality now, as I think we all know in here, is increasingly a one-size-fits-all global vision of what reality is. And if you don't adhere to this worldview that's been pumped out at you 24/7 by every mainstream media outlet in the world, and you don't agree with what's being presented, if you just say one thing, like, oh, I'm not sure about this, could we just maybe look into it a little bit more? You're a term so lazy and pejorative, I'm not even going to give it any credence. But if you question more than one thing, you're a far-right conspiracy theorist. Fascist. Yeah, it's just great, isn't it? You question more than one thing, you're a far-right conspiracy theorist, an extremist. Yeah, we heard about the truckers yesterday, didn't we? Terrorists, destroying society, destroying the country they love and grew up in. It's just absolutely such an insult. Such an insult. But I should know because that's what happened to me. And of course, this manufactured reality, I think the BBC really is top of the class, isn't it, in wanting you to believe this manufactured version of reality. It really, really wants you to believe its Ministry of Truth version of what's going on in the world. So much so, it is now spending a great deal of money, a great deal of time, and a great deal of resources into demonizing and smearing anyone questioning what that version of reality is. I think the BBC is doing this more than any other news outlet, actually. And how's it doing it? Well, it's doing it in a variety of ways. It's doing it firstly with its Trusted News initiative, which formed in 2019, right before the pandemic. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. And this is all out in the public domain, so I won't go into it too much, but the Trusted News initiative is what the BBC got off the ground, and the BBC works with other trusted broadcasters around the world, and they all get together periodically to decide what's true, what's not true, and what gets broadcast. Lovely. And it's also doing it with Project Origin, which launched in 2020. It's a very similar thing, and that's designed to ensure integrity of content. Not quite sure what that means. Sounds, again, Ministry of Truthy. We'll decide what you have. We'll decide its integrity. You don't think for yourself, it's fine. And it also does it with its media action arm, the BBC's media action arm. And this is its charity wing of the BBC, which is dedicated to spreading a BBC agenda in the developing world. And it's partly funded, as I'm sure many of you know, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by the United Nations, by the European Union, and by the UK government. And again, all of that, the Trusted News Initiative, Project Origin, and Media Action, it's all out in the public domain. And more recently, of course, the BBC is doing it with BBC Verify, and it's, I can't even say the word without laughing, really, it's Disinformation Unit, and it's queen of the Disinformation Unit, of course, Mariana Spring. And for those of you who don't know who Mariana Spring is, she's a young Oxbridge graduate who works for the BBC, and she is its specialist disinformation and social media correspondent. And she has this little podcast called Mariana in Conspiracy Land, where she investigates the UK conspiracy movement, none of which, neither of those things are real. There is no UK conspiracy movement. We don't all hang out together. We don't all decide what we're going to do on a daily basis. We're just people that don't agree with what's being told to us all the time. That's it. There is no UK conspiracy movement, and we don't all live in conspiracy land. This mythical Brigadoon, Shangri-La. None of this is true, but it's very othering. It's very separating. You know, anyone who questions an opinion, you live in conspiracy land. You're in the movement. See the language there? It's very subtle, but very powerful. But actually, I'm going to be quite charitable to Mariana Spring, even though she's gone after some friends of mine in the UK alternative movement. She's gone after the Light Paper, Darren, the editor there. She's gone after Richard D. Hall. She's gone after Jason Leosatos. And these are people with quite big followings. But she's really done a hatchet job on every single one of them. But I am going to be quite charitable, because I know that if I hadn't had my spiritual awakening in 2010, 2011, I probably would have been Mariana Spring. You know, I don't mean I would have had that job, but I would certainly have embodied all the same values as her, because, as I said before, I was a good little cog in the corporate machine. I believed all the BBC editorial values they teach you when you join. You know, I believed it when it said it was impartial, and I believed it when it said it was a trusted broadcaster. You can trust the BBC. I mean, of course I don't now, and I think if we just take a look at that word trust, you know, that should raise serious alarm bells in everybody, actually. You know, all the BBC is a trusted broadcaster. Trust the BBC, you know. You can trust us. Well, trust implies don't question us, don't look at what we're doing, don't analyse it too carefully. You know, just trust us, you know. Leave it all to us. We've got it all in hand. You don't have to do anything, don't have to think. Just trust us. We'll tell you how the world is. And of course, we shouldn't be trusting them at all. You know, we should be challenging them, holding them to account. We're paying for it. We pay for it. We shouldn't be trusting them. No way, we pay. Anyway, I'm digressing, but back to Mariana Spring. If I hadn't had my full-blown spiritual boot camp experience, I think I would have been a Mariana Spring, because the BBC is full of Mariana Springs. It really is. And I actually feel a bit sorry for her because she gets all the flack, but she's not a one-off in there, not by a long way. So what is a Mariana Spring? Well, from what I've seen and from what I was, and this doesn't make these people bad people, you know, not by a long way, you know, but the best way I can sort of illustrate what a Mariana Spring is this. Oh, pick me, I'm ever so good. Oh, I'm ever so good, me. Teacher, please, pick me, pick me, pick me. That's the kind of, in a nutshell, what a Mariana Spring kind of person really is. And, you know, they're not bad people, but there are a lot of them in the BBC, and I was one, you know, and it is by design. And I'll just use this example really to illustrate this. When I first got my job at the BBC, I was initially given a 6-month contract. And I was like, well, hang on a minute, because when I was working for the big daily paper, they gave me a full-time staff job, full-time, you know, full-time contract. Why only giving me 6 months? And the guy at the BBC who was sorting out my contract said, oh, don't worry, don't take it personally, we do it to everybody. And I said, well, why? And he said, because we need to see if you're one of us. Now, I was young, naive, didn't know what it meant, didn't really care. I know now. What it means is, are you a Mariana Spring? A good little head boy or a good little head girl that comes completely programmed into the BBC, into repeating and enforcing a collective narrative. We'll decide the narrative for you. You don't have to worry about that. Just repeat it. Just repeat it. If you come to us programmed, able to do that, brilliant. We'll use you. Brilliant. But if you come to us and you show any kind of individuality, any kind of spark, you disagree with our editorial policies or disagree with our management, your life's going to be very difficult. And I saw this firsthand, during my tenure at the BBC. I did see people come in and not go beyond the 6 months. And one of them I remember vividly, and he was a really good young guy. He'd come from a couple of red-top tabloids, national tabloids. He was a really, really good journalist. He had some brilliant stories. And his personality, he did stand up, he did go against editorial things, he did speak his mind in the newsroom, and he didn't get his contract renewed after 6 months. And he was great. It was a big loss, actually. I got on with him really well. So the BBC is full of Mariana Springs, male and female. And this is the demographic that they broadly fit. Very upper middle class. Again, it doesn't make them bad people. It is what it is. They are what they are. Very upper middle class, public school, private school education. There's a lot of Oxbridge graduates in the BBC, especially in news. Very, very over-conscientious. And very getting their self-worth from their job. And very conservative. And I don't mean that politically, I mean socially. There aren't many rock and rollers in the BBC. There aren't many mavericks in BBC News, especially. There aren't, they're straight, they're conformist. And I say it doesn't make them bad people at all. Some of those people are very nice. But it's a certain type of people. The BBC wants a certain type of people, a certain type of person. Of course, every organisation has its values. Every company wants its employees to adhere to its ethos. But you have to ask yourself, is this demographic, which makes up so much of the BBC still, and especially news, is this demographic and the values that go with it representative of all the people in the UK? Of course, absolutely not. No. That demographic is now a small part of people who make up Britain, and it certainly doesn't represent all the many views of people who now live in the UK. So that gets me on to, of course, what happened to me. And I'm not going to dwell on this too much because it is all out there in the very, very grubby public domain. But I went on anti-lockdown marches in 2020 and 2021 because, like many of you in here, I'd been hearing that this thing was going to happen for several years. I've been hearing about it at events like this. And I've been hearing about people talking about Agenda 21, Agenda 30, a global conspiracy, and I was like, that sounds a bit far-fetched. Even for me, that sounds a bit far-fetched. If it's going to happen, it won't be in my lifetime. And I was thinking, some of the people talking about this, they need to get out more, they need to get girlfriends. It's like, it's a bit far-fetched. And then, of course, it happened, and I was like, oh my God, this thing I've been hearing about, it's happening. And then I saw directly from within my own industry the huge control and suppression of information like I'd never seen it before. And it wasn't just what wasn't being broadcast to the public, it was what was going on behind the scenes. Because normally BBC newsrooms in general, are full of very robust debate. I've seen people in newsrooms have really heated conversations about things like Brexit, about Trump, and you can have a really heated exchange of views, say lots of things, but at the end of it, you'll all go to the bar, the BBC bar, have a drink, and you're all still friends. It's called being a grown-up. Not this. Absolutely not this. I'd never seen anything like that in my life, in my career. So it all felt completely wrong to me. It felt really wrong. What I was being asked to do as a producer and a presenter was wrong. I didn't want to tell people to have a test. I certainly didn't want to encourage people to have an injection, because that should all be personal choice, what you put in your body. It's a natural law, actually, and shouldn't be enforced by the state or the state broadcaster. But of course, that's what I was being asked to do daily. And the cognitive dissonance of trying to keep those two realities together, what I was being asked to do on the outside in my daily job to get money, and what the person I was on the inside, it was unbearable. It made me ill. It was making me ill. And I know my heart and my soul and my conscience were guiding me at that point, but also what happened at that point was my original journalism training kicked in. That original, don't give up, get a story, get more than one side, find out what's going on. It kicked in. And that journalism that was woefully absent in the BBC at that point kicked in. And I thought, I want to find out what's going on. And of course, I absolutely didn't agree with lockdown. It was completely inhuman, completely. So I went to some anti-lockdown marches in my personal private time, and I've often asked myself what I was doing when I was doing that. Like, what was I doing? And apart from doing a bit of real journalism, I was doing the thing, really, that my mum and dad taught me to do when I was young. And I was tapping into one of my core beliefs. And I was standing up for what I believed in. I was standing up for what I believed in, nothing more, and I was punished for it. That's a topsy-turvy world, isn't it? You get punished for standing up for what you believe in, but anyway. Now, I'm going to get a little bit controversial here, but unlike some other TV presenters who've been in the news recently, I didn't allegedly pay a young drug addict for sexually explicit pictures. I didn't abuse my position by having an unwise but not illegal affair with a very, very, very junior colleague. No, I was simply standing up for what I believed in, and I was being true to myself. And it didn't go down too well. So the BBC found out, because everything is filmed nowadays, BBC members of staff aren't supposed to have opinions on anything or go to protests. And some of my BBC colleagues, they went mad. They went mad. But instead of asking me, hey girl, 10 minutes. It's like being on the Muppets, isn't it? About a minute. So my BBC colleagues, they went mad, right? But instead of asking me directly, coming up to me and asking me what I was doing, saying, Jem, what are you doing going on these rallies? You know, have you gone nuts? What's the matter? What are you doing? Which I would have completely welcomed, because it would have kick-started some kind of debate that we clearly weren't having. No, that's not what they did. They went straight to the tabloid press. And they made me out to be a terrible person, super spreader, danger, menace to society. You know, she went to protest and then she came back. She went to protest in her lunch break and came back, which was geographically and logistically impossible, because protests were nowhere near where I lived and worked. But it was a very unpleasant time. I had the press knocking on my door for a couple of months at the end of 2020, and yeah. Now, okay, of course, I went against the BBC editorial guidelines, but in 2020, a few months before I went to my anti-lockdown marches, several members of staff in my newsroom went to the big Black Lives Matter protest in Bristol in April 2020, the big one. There were tens of thousands of people there, right in the heart of lockdown, and it's the one where the statue came down and all that stuff. You know, there were thousands of people at that one. And it's fine if that's what they want to do. They've got their opinions, let them express them, let them go, you know. But when I was hauled in by my managers, and they were like, right, you've been spotted at anti-lockdown rallies, you're not supposed to go to protests. I said, well, hang on a minute. A few months ago, earlier in the year, several members of staff went to Black Lives Matter. And this is where it kind of all changed, because one of my managers, one of my many, many managers, looked across the table at me at that point and went, that's different. They're anti-racist, you're anti-lockdown. Yeah, it's pretty much what I did. I just was like, whoa, I didn't even speak, which I thought that was unusual for me. And I looked at them and I thought, you're brainwashed. You're brainwashed, man, you're brainwashed. And then that voice, that very clear, calm voice, right there, said to me, just leave, get out of the BBC now, you're done. So I did. I handed my notice in. I took the biggest leap of faith I've ever taken in my life based on that voice, and I sincerely hope it was the right voice and not some little trickster or entity, because I left. And I walked away from the salary, I walked away from the status, I walked away from the pension. But I knew, how could I stay? And it was then that my BBC colleagues went to the papers, actually. I was working my notice from home, and that's when, and I was leaving anyway, you know, why do it? But anyway, I think they did it to destroy my reputation, possibly to make sure I never worked again. This is how strongly people felt 3 years ago, isn't it? It was so heightened, everything was so heightened. And I won't lie, it was horrible, because until that point, I'd had a good career at the BBC. I've been to BBC weddings, BBC birthday parties, I've been on holidays with people from work, you know. I had friends there, so to have it end like that, yeah, it was really disappointing. But I don't really bear them any ill will. They did what they thought was right, and actually propelled me out of a role that I'd long outgrown, but I really didn't have the courage to leave. Since my spiritual awakening, I was always going to be not adhering to those values, and I wasn't. I just didn't have the courage to leave. And going back to this hidden hand of the universe, whatever you want to call it, I firmly believe the universe kicked me out of my life at that point by engineering this very particular set of circumstances to jettison me out of a life I was no longer supposed to be in and wasn't ever going to go back to. Just like the times it kept me in, every time I tried to leave, you know, what's the expression? Every time I tried to get out, they pulled me back in, all of that. Well, this time it kicked me out. Because once your workmates leak stories to the tabloid press about you because they don't agree with your views, it really is no going back. It was meant to be. Now, of course, my public hanging happened because I went against the official narrative, and I was far from the only one. You know, there's a huge swathe of the British public going against the official narrative, but of course there was no coverage in the media, certainly no BBC coverage. You'd have to be on a protest to know how big they were. So they had all the mainstream broadcasters and the state broadcaster paid for by the public deliberately ignoring a huge cross-section, massive cross-section of the British public. So this censorship happened and is still happening all over the world. And why is it happening? You know, what is wrong in this day and age? How have we got to this point where you can't have a different opinion without being demonized? You know, we heard about the truckers yesterday, for example. And why have so many professionals, not just me, you've had doctors, scientists, lawyers, virologists, you know, other journalists, all been vilified and silenced? Well, some would argue it's possibly because the media's in the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies, and I think, yeah, there's an element of that. And some will argue it's about control, and this is what I think. It is about control, but it takes me back to the woo-woo stuff. This growing spiritual awareness that's sweeping the planet, that's what they're trying to silence. Because if this growing spiritual awareness carries on at the rate it's going, it's game over for every single mainstream media outlet on the planet and the corporations that own them and the people that own those corporations, if you can call them people. People that don't care about the planet, people don't care about us, they just care about profit and power. It's game over for all of them, and they know it. Because if we carry on waking up and getting to know each other and talking to each other, we're making a new world, and it doesn't include them. And this spiritual awareness is growing hugely, and I'm just going to use another example here. Like, I grew up in a small town in North Somerset where everybody knows each other, and I went to school with someone who grew up to be one of Bristol's most famous football hooligans. Really good football hooligan. He's one of those football hooligans that, like, his face is on a board at the airport, and he can't travel out of the country when the Euros are on or the World Cup. He's a lockdown football hooligan. He's a very violent guy, actually, very violent. I still know him. I haven't seen him for a while, but I bumped into him the other day outside the Co-op, of all places. And he's not into this. Absolutely not. He's not into this at all. But we started talking, and he's definitely having his perception shift. His heart and soul are kicking in. Because he said to me, out of the blue, he just said to me, he said, I don't know what's happening to me in the last few years, Jem, but I feel really different. He said, all I want to do on the weekends now is go wild camping, hiking, want to be in nature. He said, I've given up drinking, I've given up taking cocaine. He said, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I feel really different. I can't believe some of the stuff I used to do. I was like, oh, really? Interesting. And then he said, unprompted, he said, oh, I can't watch the news anymore, Jem. It does my head in. It does my head in. And he said, I reckon back in the day, that the news is what was fueling my hooliganism. He said, I reckon, it feels like the news was trying to control me. He said, it's all a load of rubbish, isn't it? And I went, yes, yes. Because it's happening to him. And if it happened to me, I was totally in my ego. This guy was a former football hooligan, you know. But we're all waking up, you know. And that's what this last 3 years has been about, I think. It's my take, the silencing of this spiritual shift. And luckily, the media's attempts to quash and silence any kind of debate has backfired, and people are now turning away from the mainstream in their droves. And of course, what they're turning to is the alternative media. And I just think we need to touch on this here at the end. I know I haven't got long. I promise I won't go over. Well, you won't let me. I have a lot of respect, you know, the utmost respect for the UK alternative media scene. I know the guys at the Light Paper really well. I know the guys at UK Column really well. I know the guys at TNT Radio in this country really well. And of course, I worked at Iconic for the best part of a year. But I am going to be quite controversial here. It's like going back to what I said at the start. It doesn't really matter what you're watching, Strictly or the 6 o'clock news or whatever, if the end result, emotionally and physiologically, is that you go, oh my God. And I think the alternative media are in danger of this. So, for example, like the mainstream media will say, get a vaccine or you'll die. And the alternative media will go, don't get a vaccine or you'll die. But if you're a viewer, you're like, oh my gosh, I get a vaccine, oh my gosh, I shouldn't get a vaccine, oh my God, and you get all hyper and stimulated and worked up. And then the alternative media as well, it loves a bit of drama, like 15-minute cities are coming, and you're like, oh my God, 15-minute cities, central digital banking currencies, and you're like, oh no, this is all terrible. And of course, you're all worked up. It's no different to watching the mainstream. And I know there are people in this audience, I know that Tony's one of them, they'll go, no, it's really important information and we need to know it. We've got to know it. And I'll be like, yeah, maybe important. Is it really? I don't know, but I don't think it's healthy. This constant flow, this tyranny of information designed to stimulate and distract and to gratify us, it keeps us in our egos, keeps us in this receptive state, keeps us away from the present moment, which is where the real magic of your life happens. You know, and also the alternative media, it has the confirmation bias and the polarization that all the mainstream have. You know, if you want your particular core beliefs reinforced, you know which newspaper to pick up, you know which television channel to tune into. It's all designed to appeal to your core beliefs and confirmation bias, and it's very divisive, but it's how the mainstream sells products. And I think the alternative is a little bit like that, you know, and it's operating on a bit of a old paradigm of competition and like, oh, we'll get the best guest for our radio station and we'll get the best guest for our live stream. And that's not going to work if we're going to move into this new age. Now, I wouldn't dream of telling anyone in here what to do, God forbid, not this audience. If you want to watch the mainstream media, watch it, if you want to consume it. And if you want to consume alternative media, absolutely, but do it consciously. I would just advise, do it consciously. Use that bigger part of yourself. So for the last year, I've been training here in Glastonbury for a qualification in psycho-spiritual counselling, and one of my teachers is really fond of this saying, you are what you consume. You are what you consume. And if you think about that, if you're consuming, even if it's from the alternative, this distraction, this stimulation, this negativity, this drama, then what are you if you are what you consume? Luckily, I think a lot of the alternative media is definitely now realizing this. And I've chatted to a lot of them about it because I know them well. And I think it's really working hard now to change and to provide solution-focused journalism, solution-focused news, which is much needed, and it's getting that actual feedback from its audience as well, who are also saying, can you stop telling us how awful the world is? We need to move forward, and the alternative media needs to lead the way. But I think we have to be careful with media in this time of transition, which we're absolutely in, that we are not swapping one set of sensationalist headlines for another, just to get that egoic hit, that stimulation and reward, that gratification, that ego hit. We have to be honest with ourselves about this, because if we are indeed a bunch of critical, free-thinking individuals, you must look at what you're doing with your life, because if you're lying to yourself, well, in any area of your life, what life are you living, And if we are doing that, swapping one set of drama for another set of drama, if we're addicted, well, like all addictions, wouldn't it be better to cut it off at the root and do a little bit of cold turkey for a while, maybe? Just step away from it all, just for a bit, and instead of listening to all those other voices in the media tell you what's going to happen and how you're going to live your life and this is how the world's going to be and this is how you should be in it, or anyone telling you what to do, any of us on stage this weekend telling you this is how the world's going to be and this is what it's going to be like, and don't listen to anyone for a while. Step away. Instead of listening to all those voices, listen to your voice, this own inner voice, this calm, clear, centered, certain voice, which I've heard a lot over the last 10 years. And that voice knows exactly what you need to hear, and it knows exactly when you need to hear it. And maybe that is the voice that we should all be listening to if we do want to create this better world. So that is my talk. That is my story. And remember, hang on, I haven't finished. It is just a story. So take what resonates with you this afternoon, discard the rest, and if nothing's resonated, that's fine. Thank you for coming. But it is my story, and I am sticking to it, and thank you very much for listening to it.